Okay, welcome to this second part of our lecture. We're looking at Christian worldview and assessment, and what do you really believe? In the first lecture, we looked at animism, pantheism, and naturalism, often called modernism. In this lecture, we're going to look at postmodernism and theism, and Christianity fits under theism. So now, background information on postmodernism. It began in the mid to late 20th century, and it's present across all areas of philosophy, the arts, architecture, education, and criticism. This is the most widely believed non-Christian worldview in the world today. It pervades current thoughts and actions, news media reporting, even among practicing Christians. Many practicing Christians hold postmodernism beliefs and do not realize that these beliefs are counter to Christian beliefs. It started with the idea of modernism, and it has expanded on the basic tenets. So what are the basic tenets of postmodernism? The biggest one is truth is relative. There is no absolute truth. Truth is a product of social, historical, or political interpretations or opinions. Truth is contextual, or based on the society or culture where the behavior happens. It might be okay to do something in one place, but not okay to do it in another place. There is no absolute truth. There is no objective idea of reason, social program, moral standards, or absolute truth. Everything is contextually or socially constructed. So accordingly, postmodern thought is broadly characterized by tendencies to epistemological and moral relativism, pluralism, irreverence, and self-reverential behaviors. So let me give you some definitions of those words. Epistemological relativism means the facts are used to justify any claims. Any facts that you use are relative and subjective or subject to the perspective of the one who is making those claims. So facts are not absolute. Facts are how I interpret them to be. Moral relativism is the view that ethical standards, morality, beliefs in what is right and wrong are all culturally based and therefore subject to an individual's individual choice. We can all decide what is right for ourselves. You decide what is right for you, and I'll decide what is right for me. Moral relativism says, if it's true for me, if I believe it. It's true for me if I believe it. Now, what is pluralism? This means there is a diversity of views, not one single approach. And self-reverential behavior refers to the self. It's the belief of self-determination of what is true, moral, and right. There is no outside authority. In other words, there is no supreme God. So now, let's look at the key tenets. It focuses on individual truths. What I believe is true is all that matters. It avoids information that's based on cultural, races, tradition, or groups. If I happen to disagree with what the group says, I'm right. It believes that individual experiences are relative and cannot yield universal truths. It does not believe in absolute principles for all, such as those that are present in religious or Christian teachings and Christian truths. The rules, policies, and guidelines for behavior cannot be set as absolutes. If it's right for me, it's right. So how does this translate to educational experiences? Well, let's look at the different types of assessment. Administering assessments does not always take time away from learning. Let your assessments double as learning experiences. The benefits of assessments as an instructional activity are many. It enhances student content understanding, promotes essential skills that can transfer to other aspects of student lives. It helps them see the big picture. It helps them develop effective oral and written reports, and it helps them work cooperatively with their peers. So if we're looking at assessments, we have traditional assessments, we have performance-based assessments, and for those we use rubrics. We have portfolio assessments, and again we use a rubric for a portfolio assessment. And then we have affective assessments about attitudes, things such as a Likert scale or a rating scale. There's something called a semantic difference scale, checklist, or ranking. And then you have alternate response types of assessments. So let's look at the traditional assessments. We're going to go through each of these one at a time. A traditional assessment: tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So a definition of a traditional assessment: these are conventional methods of testing. Typically produces a written document, such as a quiz, an exam, some kind of a written paper. An additional example of this: standardized tests, most state achievement tests, graduation exams, or senior papers. Well, what about portfolio assessments? Well, this is a purposeful collection of student work that is collected over time. The goal is to evaluate student work samples, their learning progress, and their academic achievement. A portfolio assessment is not just a completion of work. Elementary schools call collections of work portfolios, and then they sign it home for the weekly signed papers. That is not a portfolio. A portfolio is a purposeful collection of work. And the essential element of a portfolio: the student needs to reflect or analyze the documents that are contained within the portfolio. What about effective assessments? Okay. Well, the definition: it's an assessment based on the student's attitudes, interests, and values. Effective assessment types: you've got Likert scales. Notice here's a Likert scale: strongly agree, disagree, undecided, agree, or strongly agree. You've got rating scales. Where are you on this line? You've got semantic differential scales. How would you describe Kmart? But clean to dirty, bright to dark, low quality, high quality. Those are semantic differences. Affective assessments. Well, the assessment is a checklist, okay? I just went blank. Okay. And then you have ranking, where you rate 1 through 5. These are all ranking for effective assessments. So now, the definition of effective assessment: again, you're looking at students' attitudes, interests, and values. What is an alternate response assessment? Well, alternate response assessment is a special case of a multiple choice assessment. Forced choice, true, false, either or types of questions. You could have choose all that apply. I know many of you have had those type of questions on our quizzes here, and you probably hate them because you can choose almost all and only get partial credit. This is best used when you want to assess a student's ability to recall facts or knowledge. And when carefully written, it can be used to measure some application or comprehension. For example, true or false: if a distribution of scores has a few extremely low scores, then the median will be numerically larger than the mean. That's an alternative response. What about performance-based assessments? A definition requires that the students demonstrate their mastery of specific skills or concepts. It typically requires students to perform or produce something. For example, designing and carrying out experiments, writing essays, which require students to rethink, integrate, or apply information in a new way, working with other students to get something done, demonstrate proficiency in using a piece of equipment or a technique, building models, developing, interpreting, and using maps, making collections, writing term papers, critiques, poems, or short stories, giving speeches, playing a musical instrument, participating in an oral exam, developing a portfolio, or developing your athletic skills or routines. It's now being incorporated into state end-of-year assessments. Now, the performance assessment on the end of year are relatively quick. They're not long-term assessments. Now, in this course, I'm going to be mentioning a few ideas where you can develop formative assessments, but we're not really going to pursue that in depth. So now let's look at theism. Theism is our Christian belief. It's one God. Christianity is a theistic worldview. Ethics are firmly based on moral absolutes. There is an absolute right and an absolute wrong. It's belief in a transcendent God who has shown humankind what is right and what is wrong. Ethics and moral behavior are based on God's revelation of what's right and wrong. It's not based on what we think. It's based on what God has shown us. Whatever God has revealed to be right is right. And anything that runs contrary to that is wrong. Now, there is a transcendental definition. What is a transcendent God? God is wholly independent of the material universe. God is beyond all physical laws. God is supreme. So how does this apply to assessment? Well, here are some secular principles. Okay, we believe in secular principles: fairness, reason, cultural norms, the level of harm to self and others, parental values and guidance, autonomy, duty. Okay, for reason, we ask, is this reasonable about an ethical stance? Not is it right, but does it make sense? The level of harm to self and others, what leads to the greatest good or the least harm? In other words, everything is relative. Parental values and guidance, we ask, what would mom do? What would dad do? Autonomy is our freedom of choice. Duty, what allegiance or actions do we owe to our family, our community, or our nation? And we are focusing on avoiding or preventing suffering. So how does this compare and contrast to Christian principles? Well, there's stewardship, caring for what God has entrusted to us to care for. Sacrifice, putting others ahead of ourselves, doing the right thing, even when it means our needs might go unmet. We value both self and others as made in God's image. We respect ourselves and others because we belong to God. The dignity of all people. Every person is valuable because they are made in God's image. We value community and communal values over our own individual values. We believe in the baptismal covenant. We are staying true to all that we profess when we commit and recommit to our baptismal covenant. The broader idea of covenant with God and others, we have an allegiance not just to ourselves and our families, but to God and our community. And then we need to have compassion. We need to respond to suffering when we see it. So what's next? Do the reading and writing assignments, answer your discussion questions, and take a quiz. Here are the references used in the creation of this lecture, and here are the sources of the images.